Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about a skill that is very near and dear to my heart, Cyclone. Now, after years under the Totem Cuck umbrella, you might not believe to hear this, but before I was a streamer, I was actually kind of a Cyclone main for a while. In fact, this was one of my first videos ever, and it was one of the most fun builds I've ever played. This is not sped up, by the way. This is how you could play Cyclone even up to like I think that was 3.14 or something, or 3.15. Back in Legion League, I just fell in love with it whenever you had the crazy AoE, like actual screen-wide AoE. And I know you can kinda still achieve similar-ish AoE, but you're basically throwing away all your damage. The point was back then, Cyclone also did damage on top of that. So it was just a really nice skill to play, and I kind of wish it was back. Well, the change we got actually makes me quite excited for what the Transfigure gems are going to be for Cyclone. Because Cyclone's just got a nerf on its base gem. Not completely. I'm going to talk about that in a second. There's actually one application that's going to be busted no matter what the Transfigure gems are going to be. But the base gem kind of got nerfed. And I'll talk about the AoE here in a bit. But that makes me excited because there's no reason to nerf Cyclone right now. Nobody's playing it, really, other than on cast and crit builds. So that means they have something in store for the Transfigure gems. Or maybe they're just going to give us back the stages from before. I have no idea either way. Let's get into the AoE nerf. Now, to understand the nerf at all, we have to first talk about Cyclone because it's a little bit more complex than you might think. They changed this one, I think even back in 3.7 or something, just so crazy AoE like back then can never really happen again unless you want to sacrifice everything about your build. So they changed it so the base weapon range of Cyclone is always 11. It used to very much matter, or sorry, 1.1 meter is the new way you write it. And that basically means that stuff like staves and other weapon bases that have a lot of weapon range can't just increase the base range. And the base range is what matters. Because all the increases you get from being a Slayer, from getting extra AoE in the passive tree, from getting melee strike range and whatnot, that will have a lot of diminishing returns. But the base radius is king. And that base radius is fixed. It doesn't matter what kind of weapon you're using. However, there is one exception to this, and that is added weapon range on weapon, which is kind of a relic of the past, but there is some weapons, for example, at Serious Disfavor has this weapon range, and it gives you plus 10 of it. It's very strong. I think it's also on the Essence of Dread, if I remember correctly, but good luck trying to get good physical damage on a weapon while spamming a suffix. It's like, I mean, good luck is all I'm gonna say. And another thing that used to give you base range was the stages, but they now got removed. So how big of a deal is that? More on that in a second. Okay, so we determined our base range. Let's just, for example, say that your base range is 1.1 meter, and then you get plus 1 meter from your Juris Disfavor. Cool and all. There is one more thing, though, because we get a lot of increases. That comes after the base. So Cyclone also, right now, says 8% increased area of effect per 0.1 meter additional melee strike range. And melee strike range is the stuff that you get on the passive tree and from non-weapons. Everywhere other than the weapon is melee strike range. It's not the same as weapon range. Look here again. It says plus 10 to weapon range. This one here says very clearly melee strike range. So these do not add to your base range anymore. They used to, which is why it was so crazy back in the day, but now it's completely, or it's neutered down to a lot lower potential. So, for example, plus 0.3 meter gives you 24% AoE, because every 0.1 meter gives you 8, right? So that stacks up, and that way you get a lot of increased. Obviously, increases still work. So this gets added to, for example, Slayer's increased AoE per enemy killed recently. So now we can talk about the Cyclone changes. No longer has first hit deals 50% less damage. Some people are talking about this as if it was like a big buff or anything like that. So if you think about Cyclone, it has 300% attack speed multiplier. It hits so many times. And only the first hit out of these, I don't know, 12 hits per second deals 50% less damage. It's irrelevant. Like, this is not a buff. It's like whatever. Even if you like leap slam and just tap real quickly, you will barely notice a difference. Maybe a little bit on Shockwave Cyclone, but even on Shockwave Cyclone, Shockwave is the star, not Cyclone itself, right? It's just a proc mechanism. So yeah, that buff, quote unquote, doesn't really do much. So they completely removed the stages from it. So the stages gave you up to plus 7 base weapon range, not melee strike range, weapon range. And to compensate for that, the increased AoE per melee strike range is now 10 instead of 8. Now, as an example here to compare old and new area, I will show you old Cyclone with 7 stages and a Void Forge, which gives you a little bit of AoE. And then I kind of approximated from PoE Ninja what most builds would have. And I'm talking about builds that still deal damage, but have decent to good AoE. So you have 15 melee strike range and 100% ink AoE. 15 melee strike range means 15 times 8. That is a total of another 120 AoE, which gets added to this one. As you can see right here, we have 3.1 meter radius. That's pretty decent, right? Let's see what that would look like with a Ziri's Disfavor. With the Ziri's Disfavor, we would go up to 3.4 meters. Quite strong so far, right? Well, what happens with no stages? Let's go to 0 stages and just first start out with the Void Forge. Let's go to 0 stages. 2.2 meter. I guess it was kind of a big deal. Okay, let's see this just for a second. Because that's not the whole story. Because they did just buff something, right? It went from 8% to 10%. Wow. It was 8%. That's so much, right? That must be a lot. Well, on 15 melee strike range, that means an extra 130 AoE. Let's see. 2.3 meters. Conclusion. Cyclone loses around about 25 to 35% of its AoE, depending on the setup. The more you really invested before, the more you're going to lose now. So that is quite big, but I want to emphasize here that this is only base Cyclone. It is not a transfigured Cyclone, and they did say that they want to make the base gems a little bit weaker, and that the transfigured gems are going to be mostly straight up upgrades. But still important to know with this change. Now, let's get to the main course though, which is the new quality, which is actually a positive note right here. The quality now provides 0 to 10% more movement speed instead of AoE. And that, my friends, is insane. So if you don't know, Cyclone had a divergent version of it, which had 5% more movement speed before, and that is now doubled, and it is on the main gem. If you look at Cyclone, it has a 30% less movement speed multiplier right here. And this is not a different multiplier. It actually subtracts from the 30%. So if you, for example, get 5% more movement speed, that 30 goes down to 25. So you can get that to 0, but not just to 0, you can get it into the positives. Now, usually, cycloning around is going to make you slower. However, let's look at what happens if the new quality holds up and we can make a nice little setup. You start with 30% less movement speed while channeling. You get 23 quality, which you only need 22, but let's just say at 23, you get 11% more movement speed. So there's only 19% less move speed left. You get Ashes, that is another 15% more movement speed from the new quality. You get a Dialas, another 15% more movement speed, and then a level 5 Woken Hands with another 16% more. And that comes out to 27% more movement speed while channeling. Wow, that is basically self-chill, and you can stack it with, it's multiplicative with self-chill. It's absolutely nuts, but you might ask here, okay, so why the hell would I use my Ami slot, my body armor slot? I would lose a link just to get that much more movement speed. There's no way that can be worth it, and you can still deal damage. Well, the answer is, as always, cast on crit. Ashes of the Stars is already one of the best caster amulets, is already used in a lot of them, and a lot of the other spells also got their quality quite increased, so that will mean that Ashes is even more sought after. Obviously, you lose the preservation efficiency. It's actually already updated on PoE Wiki. That's pretty cool. But yeah, you're basically double dipping 2 different gems on that. Same is true for Dialas. On an attack build, it doesn't make much sense, especially with all the other qualities gone with like Anomalous and Divergent and stuff like that. And even if the quality doesn't do anything for your spell, you can still just give your spell +2, which is huge. And you can get a Corruption on for even more +2 levels. So it just makes sense because you have Cyclone and your spell in the same setup, which also means that Enhance is -1 link because it's linked to Cyclone, but it's also linked to your main skill. And if you're looking at, for example, skills like Bladefall, they would now get a lot of extra value from that extra quality. And it's not just Bladefall, it's just an example. A lot of them now have multiplicative damage bonuses. So while this is completely terrible for normal Cyclone, attack-based Cyclone, it is quite remarkable for, I don't know, a spell that already has really good quality. You would already play Ashes and Dialas anyways. It throws an Enhance into the main setup, and you're looking at a 27% more movement speed. I mean, Honestly, I don't know if this will work out like I think it will, but I might just try it out. But yeah, with that said, since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.